And what we need to do now is define what is the task that people are doing? How do they need to do it? How are they going to get the information? Who's going to coach and mentor them? Who's going to help them get through it? And then how are they going to give back once they kind of get it and somebody new comes in? And that's the way learning should work. And when people are learning and they're successful, they're going to be ambitious.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi, and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. My name is Rick Nusky. I'm the luckiest person in the world because I get to host this fantastic show and I spend time with some incredible people. And today is absolutely no different because I'm on the line with the wonderful Cheryl Johnson. Welcome to the show, Cheryl.
Glad to be here.
Yes, fantastic. Now, Cheryl is a book author. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into her book, The Ambition Quotient, and how to motivate your employees to bring their best to your organization. But before we do that, Cheryl, I think it's good in terms of context to maybe share a little bit about yourself with the My Future Business in terms of your career and how it came to be that you wrote this wonderful book.
Well, it's probably been 30 years in the making.
Oh, wow.
I know. I know. I'm a slow writer. No, I started off probably early 90s training people with disabilities to use computer technology.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there just wasn't any really formal training materials out there. And the technology was used both the voice recognition where you talk to your computer and it recognizes you. Nowadays, that's like nothing.
Yeah.
In the 90s, it was, high tech.
Cutting edge.
And screen reading where the computer talks to you kind of thing. And the hardware wasn't real compatible with the software. There was a lot of issues in getting it up and running. And a variety of people used it. Doctors and lawyers were wanting to use the voice recognition technology so they could dictate their notes and just transcribe them. And then I had people who had real severe learning disabilities using it, as well as people with just physical disabilities. So I had a broad range of people who my audience, who needed training. And there was no one size fits all, which it's funny because common sense says training isn't a one-size-fits-all, but yet we create training and learning experiences as if they are a one-size-fits-all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I have 4 kids, and each of them, have their own unique personalities. One has a learning disability. The others tend to be more on the other end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And, each of them had their own unique ways of learning and acquiring information and actually using it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I got started. And that's where, I wasn't trained. I didn't go to college at that point in my life and didn't have anybody teach me anything. I was just through trial and error. I was like, this learning thing is pretty, I wouldn't say complex, but it's everybody has their own way of doing it. We talk about learning styles and visual and kinesthetic and auditory, and I'm like, no, first of all, we're all visual learners, and believe it or not, our primary mode, all of us, we learn by doing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a given. But how some people do it is different than how other people do it.
Yes.
So I started writing my own materials at that point in time, and that's kind of how I got started. And I noticed that people who tended to be more ambitious were those who, say, the school system, that they came through fit their way of learning best, so they were highly motivated. As a matter of fact, I read this study a long time ago. Sorry.
No, absolutely.
Talking here is they ask a bunch of high-performing students at a high school, informal, not a real, scientific study or anything, what makes you so successful? And, you think, oh, well, I do a lot of homework. I study hard. I put a lot of effort into it. And it was really sad that the number one reason across the board was because I learned to give the teacher what they wanted.
No.
And I thought, this is not good. So if you're not a student who can give a teacher what they want, that means you're probably not going to do real well in school. If you don't spend, I mean, if you spend 12, 13 years of your life in school and not doing well, you're probably not going to be real motivated, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so at the core, you know, ambition, there's no real secret sauce to it. It's basically people having success.
Yeah.
Success breeds success.
Yeah.
And you want to be more successful, so you're ambitious.
Yep. It seems fairly simple on the surface. So because of the school system that you've just talked about, excuse me, is it hard to unlearn once you've been, I guess, institutionalized through a school system to become ambitious as you become, I guess, a young adult and start working in the workplace?
I think you become a little less trusting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you unlearn, because I think you probably didn't learn to begin with.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
a perfect example is my son. He had a really severe learning disability. He had auditory processing issues, and that doesn't mean he couldn't hear. If you gave him a hearing
Mm-hmm.
test, he could hear just fine. What it meant was that he couldn't process auditory sounds the same way you and I do. So you can imagine learning to read, understanding what's going on in school. If you're not hearing the same kind of information somebody else is, but you're too young to really tell anybody that, you know, and
Yeah.
you don't know, all you know is what you know.
Yeah.
And once we got him diagnosed and got some interventions, a lot of interventions, we found that he just naturally started doing better. Now, mind you, we didn't get this figured out till he was junior high, you know, middle school age. And so he was behind in a lot of the subjects that he, you know, was taking, and
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of catch-up work to do. But he didn't really have to unlearn anything. It was amazing. Well, I have to tell you this story. It's not in the book, but um, I guess it's one of the proud moments as a parent here. As you can imagine, for so many years, he had struggled and struggled and struggled.
Mm.
And for the most part, teachers didn't like him. I mean, he wasn't a troublemaker. He was just one of those kind of kids that, you know, if he didn't understand what was going on, he'd kind of zone out and not
Mm-hmm.
pay attention.
Yeah.
And teachers would get frustrated with him because of that. And so, sad to say, but like fourth grade, he went to a school that was out in the middle of the desert in Utah somewhere. Wasn't a lot around, but there was no fences around the playground either. And one day he went out to recess and didn't come back.
Didn't come back.
Yeah, he was in fourth grade, and he decided he would rather sit out in the middle of the desert by himself than he would go to school. So you can imagine what a challenge that was for him, you know.
Oh.
But by seventh grade, we'd moved to Virginia, and there were some teachers there who just really took an interest in him. He had been tested. He didn't qualify for he qualified for an IEP under, you know, go technical here, under 504, but
Mm-hmm.
not under a standard IEP, because he was really good in math and science, but he really struggled in reading and, you know, and English. So unless you score low across the board, you don't
Qualify.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I had his English teacher. She pulled me in one day early on, I think it was October, and she was like, you know, he's really got issues here. And I was like, yeah, thank
Mm-hmm.
you. She says, like, why doesn't he have an IEP? Why doesn't he have? And she says, oh, we're getting him one. And, you know, you can figure out ways to do anything. And she did. And she really worked with his teachers, and it was just like a transformative year. And I remember at the end of the year, they called me and they were like, okay, you know, we want you to come to this little award ceremony. All the kids, you know, attend the award ceremony at the end of the year. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I was used to football awards. He played football, and, you know, yeah, he got awards all the time. And I was like,
Yeah, really?
yeah, I know. And I was like, I have to take off work, you know, blah, blah. So I got there, and I sat there, and we went through all your typical awards, you know, that
The
everybody
hoo-ha.
gets. Yeah. And I was about ready to fall asleep. I'm like, okay, when's this going to be over, kind of thing. And then they went through the awards where, you know, everybody gets an award. I was like, okay, you got me. I took off work to come here so he can get a little award that
Uh,
everybody's going to get, kind of thing. No,
yeah.
no, no, not. I'm not happy about that. Well, evidently, at the very end, there was an award, and it was the time President Bush was president, and he
Hmm.
had implemented this. I should have too bad I don't have his little plaque that President Bush had implemented. He said, it wasn't for the smartest student or the most successful student, but it wasn't for the one who tried the hardest, kind of thing either.
Hmm.
It was really one who'd shown the most transformation over a year, and so I was sitting there, and all of a sudden they said my son's name, and I was like,
Uh,
what? And I looked over at my son because he wasn't sitting by me. He was off with his friends over there. And even he was like, he woke up and he's
hang
like,
on.
my name, my name.
Is there a mistake?
I know. And his friends started laughing and they were all like, you serious? Come on. And I mean, I was just like almost in tears, and I was like,
Oh, I can
whoa,
imagine.
because this was the pinnacle. This was the biggest award that they gave.
Yeah.
And after that, I wouldn't say, he went from, failing to A's,
Hmm.
but his motivation level increased dramatically.
It changed.
Mhm.
Mm. That's amazing.
And it's just from, we talk about schools and how teachers, we need more money per student and blah, 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 blah. These teachers really didn't do anything that different
No.
other than just take an interest in him.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Isn't it amazing how that's that moment in time, that genesis, just that spark in his eye gave
Mm-hmm.
you, I guess, the direction to do more of the work that you've done, and in turn go ahead and continue working like this with other people. Can I ask you some foundational questions? Where did you come up with the name Ambition Quotient, and what does that actually mean?
Um, I've worked with lots of marketing and sales people, and because for years as an instructional designer and as somebody who writes a lot of curriculum
Hmm.
for large companies, I've worked for Marriott, Exxon, Shell, federal government,
KPMG,
state governments, yeah,
big names.
KPMG,
Yeah.
yeah. And for the most part, they just like to do things the way they've always done things, and they're not that interested in, and so I've been like, okay, well, maybe I'm not presenting my ideas well enough.
Uh,
Maybe, I've got to come up with something. So I hired coaches, I've hired marketing people, and I came across this sales guy who's into sales, and he's the one that came up with the Ambition Quotient, and then we went ahead and trademarked it. But basically what it comes down to is, we've all heard of, your IQ,
hmm.
how smart you are. In terms of, passing an IQ test, which, by the way, I would fail miserably.
Me too, I reckon.
I know.
Don't tell
It's just
anyone.
not, yeah, I know. And then there's your EQ, which is your emotional
Emotional, yep.
intelligence.
Hmm.
And now I'd score really high on that one. That's
Yeah.
kind of my area, right? But what the premise of my book is, we focus a lot on IQ, getting people through school, educating them, blah, blah, blah. And now we're starting to focus more on people's emotional intelligence and their social skills and, communication and that kind of thing. And that's all wonderful. That's
Hmm.
great.
Hmm.
But what's still missing is the ambition quotient. It's people, what I keep hearing from employers over and over, and I've worked with lots of them,
Mm.
is people are not coming to the table with drive or ambition. They just show up and they expect either, number one, I was really good at this in school, so I expect to be really good at it at work, and
No.
it's not quite working out that way.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah. Or, I may be able to communicate well and I can kind of get along with people, but, it's fun to show up to work, but but don't really care about getting a lot of work done,
Hmm.
kind of thing. And so that's where, and this was really interesting too. I talk way too much.
No, absolutely
Um,
not. Loving this conversation.
um, I did a podcast a while ago, and she
Hmm.
was like, when she, the ambition quotient, she's like, I want to start off by saying that in this context, ambition is not a bad word. And I was like,
Huh? Uh-huh.
I know. I was like, I never thought of ambition being a bad word.
Wow, that's a bit skewed, that thought.
Well, I think and then it dawned on me. I was like, yeah, that's true. You think of all the ambitious people at work, those climbers that'll backstab and do anything to get what they want.
Yes, yes.
And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I didn't pick the right word here.
Oh, well, I think it's a
Go figure.
wonderful. I think it's a wonderful name. But you've been awarded, and recognised by Michael Allen in a learning annual. You are a architectural design specialist and interactive multimedia learning systems development person. And these are not simple things, and I guess because it's not cookie cutter, we can't do this one size fits all, as you've touched on, Cheryl. What are some of the challenges that have come to the fore in developing systems for some of these major brands?
The biggest challenge is actually getting companies to buy into the idea that it isn't one size fits all.
Right.
I have a template, and I'm not a big template fan, but it's a design document where we sit down, we talk about, what's the problem we're trying to solve with this learning solution?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I'm like,
Looking around the room.
I'm like, okay, if we can't define what the problem is, okay, who's my audience? Everybody.
Uh,
I'm like,
Not so sure about that.
I know. And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, oh, we want a 30-minute online course on sexual harassment. And I'm like, okay, how did you decide it was 30 minutes? How did you decide it was online?
Mm-hmm.
Our lawyer says that needs to be at least 30 minutes
Huh?
to make sure that if something happens that we're covered. I'm like, oh, this is what's driving this. Okay,
Oh.
this is the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Seems a bit
So
odd,
that's
doesn't it?
yeah, the biggest challenge is actually getting people to really care about learning
Yeah.
and caring whether people actually walk away with the information. This isn't on my resume, and we won't say who this employer is because it's the one I'm currently working with. No.
So I wonder, Cheryl, you've talked about your vast experience from way back when with computers. Are you finding like a hybrid approach nowadays in terms of having smart devices as part of your learning management systems? Do you do some online and some face-to-face? What's the structure generally that you've found works the best?
Well, if they'll buy into my design document idea,
Mm-hmm.
we sit down and we talk about, and a gentleman that I am working with right now at my employer,
Mm-hmm.
really, he has bought into this, so it's pretty cool. It's like, really, it comes down to two things. What do we need people to understand,
Mm-hmm.
and what do we need people to do?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people need to understand something. You get into Bloom's taxonomy and all the different levels, of understanding and, everything. But if most of the time people need to understand something, and from there they generally, not always, but they need to be able to do something. So why, if we need them to do something, are we having them read a PDF on their mobile device?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, after reading that PDF on your mobile device, are you able to do it? You read about doing an oil change. I just got an oil change on my car. I would be scared to have them changing my oil if all they had done was read a PDF.
Read a PDF.
On,
Yes.
yeah. So I that's kind of, to me, if I can get people to buy into the idea that we really need to sit down and figure out if they need to do something,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of activities, and I mean physical activities, are we going to do over and over and practice to make sure they know how to do this?
Yeah.
And that to me is what drives it. There's no real, 20% online, 30% instructor-led. No, like right now, 100% Zoom.
Yes. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, Cheryl, if going back to your children and how that award was given to them, that spark in the eye, and is this the same sort of thing that you try to encourage businesses to do and award people with recognition, because that's all it can generally take to encourage people to do more and be more and give more in a business. What does it take?
External motivation's nice, especially as you're young, when you're younger. But as you get older, it's more internal motivation.
Mm-hmm.
It's more just about, am I doing a good job? And that was another real revelation I had when I got into the work world was, to me, anytime they said training or learning, I was like, oh, where do I go? What can I do?
Yep.
I'm excited. I want to go learn. And I come out of there just most of the time. Sometimes it wasn't real good learning, but for the most part, I'd be like, oh, I learned something new. Now I have to try it. This is fun. And that, when I first started doing this, I was like, people say the word training and people are like, oh, what can I do to get out of that?
Boring.
Yeah. So, once that sunk in, I was like, okay, well, we really need to flip this a little bit more. And what I have found is that when learning is meaningful and it's applicable to what you're doing, um, I read this thing on LinkedIn, just a little meme or something, very short thing. And it was something I've been trying to preach at for 10 years. And I'm like, oh, people are finally getting this. It used to be we sat down, we defined our learning objectives, and we wrote some content, and we delivered it in a learning environment, and then we assessed whether people knew it and moved on. Now, and truly, as fast as things are moving, and with technology and all of the information, I tell people this over and over, and they're finally starting to get it. If you hire somebody fresh out of college today, their skills are not going to be relevant 5 years from now.
Yeah.
And so if what do you expect them to do? Go back to college? I mean, they already spent 60 grand the first time around.
Yes.
They won't even have that paid off by the time you're expecting them to go back and start all over. And even colleges are starting to get this, believe it or not. Is the workplace needs to be a learning, it needs to be a learning environment.
Yeah.
And what we need to do now is define what is the task that people are doing, how do they need to do it, how are they going to get the information, who's going to coach and mentor them, who's going to help them get through it, and then how are they going to give back, once they kind of get it and somebody new comes in. And then, it's just kind of this iterative cycle that just keeps happening over and over. And that's the way learning should work. And that's when, amazing enough, I'm like, people are like, you should charge people for this information in this book. I'm like, this is common sense. How can I charge people for it? When people are learning and they're successful, they're going to be ambitious.
Yeah. It's pretty fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm like, I don't think I can trademark that or copyright it or...
I wonder, when somebody opens this book, I'd like to talk a little bit about the structure. Is it a cover-to-cover read? How does somebody consume the content in this wonderful book?
Well, the good news is it's really short. The second part is it's not, you can read it chapter by chapter, and just say this is interesting, but there are references. There's a lot of stories in there from my own life and my own experiences. And so sometimes I'll be referencing a story in chapter 5 that we talked about a little bit in chapter 3. So if you really want to understand the full context of what I'm talking about, you might have to jump back to chapter 3.
Yeah.
But it's a short read. I mean, I've had people sit down and read it in 90 minutes.
Is it a book that you think that you might go back to and have different versions and update it, or do you have anything else in the pipeline in terms of your authorship?
I was really against writing a book, honestly, because first of all, I read, and I'm like, I'm so tired of reading, because what I found and this, I'm not criticizing people here, but after about chapter 3 or 4 of somebody's book, it's like, okay, you're starting to repeat yourself.
Yes.
And as I went through this writing process, I learned from the experts that if a book isn't like 220 pages long, they don't want to publish it.
It's too much.
It's not enough.
Oh,
Yeah, seriously. That's why people repeat things over and over, because the longer your book is, they think they can sell it for more money.
like a filler.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And I'm like, I'm sorry. I said everything I needed to
Need to
say.
say, yeah.
I'm not going to repeat it 15 times. I mean, repetition is a great way to learn, but still,
Mm. Yeah. You put it in a
in a
checklist and
book.
still get the same information out
Yeah.
of
See?
it. Learning.
Yeah. But what I'm doing now is I'm actually working with an author, because
Mm.
I'm not really a professional author. Um, it's not a workbook, because those are kind of things, people are now putting exercises at the end of chapters, go try this or whatever.
Yep.
I, I'm really trying to put together a resource, more like, I don't want to call it an encyclopedia, talk about date myself here, but just something that people are like, oh, I need this X. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to go look up in the book or in this resource, and it's going to help me,
Yep.
kind of thing. And it's going to be all practical. It's like, here's a checklist. You're doing on-the-job training. Here's a checklist. Here's a competency model.
And you're doing your best by the sounds of it just to simplify this. This does not to be overly complex, does it? And I guess this would apply to any business setting, would it? Is this something you can apply across the board?
Yes, definitely.
It would seem fairly apparent that that would be the case, Cheryl. Now, when somebody wants to find this book, importantly, where are they going to find it?
Interestingly enough, it's on Amazon.
Oh, well, there you go. Imagine that.
I know, but can you imagine? I have a hard time finding my own book on Amazon. Um, yeah, you have to search by my name, Cheryl Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
and Ambition Quotient, and then you'll find it. If you don't put my name in there, for some reason, it doesn't find
Doesn't
the book.
come up.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. There's a search term that people shouldn't forget. Cheryl Johnson. Everybody's on the call today. Make sure you remember that. Now,
Yeah.
Cheryl, tell us a little bit more about your website and what might people find when they get there. And could you share that website address with us?
I have several websites.
There you go.
Smart Learning for Business Success is probably the one most people on this call would be interested in. And I
Right.
know it's a very long name, but smartlearningforbusinesssuccess.com. All one big
One big word.
series of letters.
Seriously. Alphabet.
Yes. But once again, I have a hard time because marketing people, salespeople are like, oh, you can't do that. People don't want that. This is what people want, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm never gonna be a millionaire. I'll tell you that, because I don't listen to marketing people very well, or salespeople. But
You
my
do your thing.
website, yeah, my website is a resource,
Yeah, of course.
and it's where you can go, and there's some videos on there, and there's little anecdotes, and there's little checklists, and there's little blah blah blah, to help you with whatever it is you're trying to do. Once again, I wanted it to be a resource, and they're like, people don't want resources, they want snapshots of your business. I'm like, okay, well, that's page 1, snapshot.
I'm not going to give you 3 pages of the same thing.
No,
We've
yeah.
learnt. That's wonderful. I will be making sure, Cheryl, that everybody who's on the call today gets access to not only the URL back to you, but also the links back to Amazon. And this is a rabbit hole that goes extremely deep, I'm sure, although very simplistic on the top of it. If you're a business out there and you're listening to this call and you want to learn more about this, make sure that you reach out to Cheryl. Again, I'll be making those links back to Cheryl available to you. And Cheryl, with all that being said, this has just been a wonderful time touching the surface on this wonderful book. Thank you so very much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, Then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.